agreed to do this talk, I did so in my own mind on this basis, and that is to say to you that what I'm going to say to you is exactly what I would say to the Canada-Israel Committee, to representatives of the Jewish community in Toronto or anywhere else in Canada. My father served for many years at the UN in Geneva, New York, as Canada's ambassador. In that sense, I feel I have grown up with this issue. Canada's policy, which, if you go onto the Department of Foreign Affairs website, has not actually changed very much over the years, I would point out. I'll come back to that point in a minute. Has always struck me as sensible. We supported partition before 1948 became a Jewish political identity, because a Jewish political identity in Palestine was by that time undeniable. The main point of what I want to say in my speech is this. Canada needs to be as clear an ally to the peace process and to the birth of modern Palestine as we have and will continue to be to the State of Israel. This is not about balance for its own sake. It is about doing the right thing. The thing that is right for peace and stability, the thing that is right for the interest of the people in the region, and it is right for Canada's role as a country whose international focus must once again become the prevention and the resolution of conflict in the world. The daily life of Palestinians depends on many things: Israel's goodwill, the desperately poor economy, and the persistent inner conflict that has been documented most recently, even as recently as today. I do not believe, and you will not hear me ever say, because I don't believe it to be true, that Israel is something sometimes referred to as an apartheid state. But it is a country that is surrounded by unfriendly neighbors, a Hezbollah-dominated Lebanon and a Hamas-led Gaza, which inevitably has meant an Israel preoccupied by security and profoundly skeptical of the possibilities of peace and skeptical of the rhetoric that surrounds this discussion. But the question, real question, is whether the Israeli and the Palestinian leadership have the political will or the capacity to get to a real yes. Right now, officials are exchanging maps, but these are very far from bottom lines. The Israeli conservatives that I spoke to, they talk not of resolving the conflict, but of trying to manage it. Their attention is focused much less on the negotiation process with the Palestinians and much more on Iran's nuclear intentions and that government's relationship with both Hamas and Hezbollah. Iran's president is a Holocaust denier and has made a point of describing Israel in what can only be described as the most hateful and destructive of terms. Up until now, it has refused to comply with UN resolutions on the development of its nuclear program and continues with an extensive military buildup as well as uranium enrichment. It has also played a major role in funding and supplying arms to Hamas and Hezbollah, both of which have been publicly committed to the destruction of Israel and have supported rocket, terrorist, and suicide bombing attacks on Israeli civilians. Can we persuade Iran to change course? Will sanctions and negotiations work? Of course, that should be our first choice. Canada's first choice, Israel's first choice, the world's first choice. But no one should underestimate the risks that Iran is taking with its current rhetoric and its approach. And if I must say, if I came away with one real feeling, it was the depth of concern and the depth of focus within the Israeli political establishment on what is taking place today and what is not taking place today in Iran.
But I do want to say that I believe you completely when you say that this is exactly the presentation you would have given to a Jewish community audience. One of the things that I would point out to, because we need to focus in and cut through hypocrisy to some extent. It's one thing to refer to Iran's nuclear arsenal, for example, which the CIA has given in its estimate as not including a weapons program, but not utter a word about Israel's 200 to 300 nuclear warheads. It's one thing for you to stand there and talk about Holocaust denial again from Iran, but not utter a single word about the ethnic cleansing of Palestine in 1948. Holocaust denial comes in many forms. So my question to you is, to what extent, and I'm drawing your attention back to what you said to that Toronto Star reporter, that it's important to have some sense of history, something grounded in reality. To what extent, in your mind, does ethnic cleansing, or is ethnic cleansing a fact of 1948 and the fighting of 1948?
Well, I mean, you can see what, I think we can see what happened. An awful lot of Palestinians left land which was then taken by Israelis in 1948. That's absolutely true. A lot stayed and are still there as full citizens of Israel, which is also a fact. And in the rest of the Middle East, since 1948, we've seen a major and substantial movement of the Jewish population out of every single Arab country and every major Arab community since that time. So I'm not sure if epithets are helpful here, but I don't think, see, I think it's one thing to have a sense of the history. It's another one to say, my version of the history is correct. And I don't think it's a matter of being public policy saying and identifying that this is this and this is that. I think it's a matter for Canada to say very clearly, we know that people left in great numbers in 1948. We also know, as I said, a great many Jews left between 1948 and 2000 and now, in terms of who's left Arab countries to come to Israel. And that the resolution of the refugee issue is obviously one of the most critical questions that still remains to be resolved, and that in fact is a very critical part of the resolution of the conflict.
Just as a supplement on the right to return, very brief.
Oh, this would be an exception.
And that's it. Yeah, okay, because I understand everyone's here. You spoke earlier about our values and interests as Canadians, and one of the things, because frankly I'm not satisfied with your response, but we can't debate back and forth. Other people can pick up on it. But the point is that when you think of Canadian values and what you spoke about extremism in the Middle East, and we talk about various forms, Jewish fundamentalism, Muslim fundamentalism, and even probably as dangerous as any Christian fundamentalism, all of them interacting. It seems to me, and one of the things that's emerged with great strength recently, and as part of the bankruptcy of the two-state solution that you've championed, is the issue of, or the option of a secular democratic state in which everyone will live in as equals. And if it's not a Jewish state, then refugees can actually return instead of talking about managing the refugee problem, because that's what you've done today. But I'll invite you to comment on that.
Well, I mean, you can dismiss the two-state solution. It's the one that was accepted by the PLO in 1993. It's the one that has been accepted by every major international organization that's looked at this question since 1948. And it's one which continues to be a foundation of Canadian foreign policy going back to that time. So if you're either anticipating or expecting me to stand up here today and abandon that policy, I have no intention of doing so. It seems to me that as a matter of practical reality, recognizing, as I've said, the reality of the existence of a state which has a majority of Jews as its population and which has served as a homeland to the Jewish people is a practical fact which exists in the Middle East. And the thrust of what I've been trying to say today is where I think we need to be clearer as a country in stating our position is that we also believe that a viable Palestinian state is in the interest of the Palestinian people clearly and in the interest of the world, and it's something that we should be as clearly in favor of and saying this is part of the solution as we have historically been since 1948, saying about the creation of Israel.